Thank you for joining me on the Pollination Podcast. Today, we're going to tackle one of the most controversial questions in commercial beekeeping. Is it better to feed your bees high fructose corn syrup instead of sucrose syrup? The answer is complex, and like most things in beekeeping, it depends. In today's episode, I'll share with you why I solely feed my hives high fructose corn syrup, why the data says sucrose is better, and why the customer's fear of adulterated honey is absolutely justified. Stay with me, this is a deep dive into feeding honeybees. Let's start by reminding ourselves of why we feed honeybees. Bees evolved on nectar and pollen. The nectar is converted into honey, which is a fantastic long-form energy reserve for times with reduced food availability like dearths or winter. But in modern managed beekeeping, especially in a commercial context, we have to intervene. We can't solely rely on nature to provide enough calories for our bees. Here's some reasons why beekeepers step in to feed our bees. We remove surplus honey, which leaves less natural food stores. We move hives constantly to pollination sites, where natural forage might be limited or just temporary. We need consistency, predictability, and efficiency in our hives for those of us who are trying to make a living with our bees. As a commercial beekeeper, I simply cannot always wait for a natural nectar flow. If I'm gearing up for almond pollination, I need to feed my hives heavily to build their populations up for the job. Feeding bees is a tool to maintain populations, ramp up brood production, and prevent starvation. Supplemental feeding is essentially part of the business model for large-scale beekeeping. It's how we stabilize, accelerate, and synchronize the strength of thousands of colonies. When deciding between sucrose and high fructose corn syrup, the choice is not as simple as people first think. It's a decision with many factors involved. Let's look at the science. To compare sucrose and high fructose corn syrup meaningfully, we have to understand exactly how bees process carbohydrates. For beekeepers, the choice is far more complex than just cost. What sugar you choose affects the bee's internal biology. When a bee consumes sucrose, it's a disaccharide. That means two sugar molecules bound together. The bee uses an enzyme called invertase to break that bond, creating fructose and glucose. This is the exact same metabolic step that happens when a bee processes nectar. When a bee consumes high fructose corn syrup, however, it's already composed of fructose and glucose. Honeybees actually save the inversion step when consuming high fructose corn syrup, but research suggests this is not necessarily a good thing. Studies have shown that colonies fed high fructose corn syrup often exhibit smaller fat bodies than those fed sucrose or honey. Now, why is that important? The fat body is the bee's version of a liver and an immune system. Smaller fat bodies suggest a reduced capacity for detoxification and long-term survival, which is especially critical for overwintering success. In fact, research has shown that chronic high fructose corn syrup feeding elicits hundreds of measurable differences in gene expression in the bee's fat body compared to honey. These differences include genes involved in protein metabolism and oxidation reduction, which affects the bee's internal stress management system. This suggests the bee's entire metabolic system is under greater strain when consuming high fructose corn syrup than when fed a diet of natural nectar or honey or even a sucrose syrup alternative. Since the individual bee sees more benefit from sucrose feeding, this will have improvements on the colony level as well. For example, colonies fed sucrose have been shown to have significantly higher wax production, in some trials, nearly double the amount compared to colonies fed high fructose corn syrup. Drawing new comb is highly energy intensive, and sucrose appears to be a superior feed for comb production. In field trials, colonies supplemented with sucrose through the winter months have exhibited increased spring brood production and larger adult bee populations compared to those fed high fructose corn syrup. A stronger spring population means faster gearing up for production season. Bees also show a clear preference for sucrose syrup over high fructose corn syrup. They have a higher appetite and consumption rate for sucrose syrup, indicating it is a more effective stimulant when trying to build up a hive rapidly. What feed source you use also impacts the bee's gut health. When overwintering, studies have found that sucrose feeding actually increased the relative abundance of beneficial bacteria in the bee's midgut. On the other hand, high fructose corn syrup has been linked to reduced microbial diversity and changes in gut flora. This negative change can disrupt the bee's natural resistance to pathogens. Also, since high fructose corn syrup has such a high free fructose content, that can be problematic for the bees. Pure fructose solutions have been shown to be less efficiently digested by bees, and in some cases, it can lead to a digestive disorder. This slower absorption leaves a higher concentration of sugar in the lower digestive tract of the bees. In cold temperatures, especially during winter, the unabsorbed fructose can lead to the formation of fructose crystals in the bee's hindgut or rectum. These crystals are sharp and irritating, compounding the digestive distress and potentially damaging the internal lining. Crystallization prevents the bees from holding their waste, forcing them to defecate inside the hive, which is essentially dysentery for bees, which promotes disease spread like nosema. We also can't talk about high fructose corn syrup without addressing its most dangerous flaw, hydroxymethylfurfuryl, or the much more easily pronounced HMF. HMF is a compound produced when high fructose sugars are exposed to heat, acidity, or long-term storage. Sucrose, by contrast, is a much more stable compound that is significantly less prone to HMF formation. HMF is a known toxin to honeybees. Caged bee studies have shown that the survival rate of honeybees decreases when fed HMF-heavy diets. For a commercial beekeeper, using high fructose corn syrup introduces a very real risk. If your syrup supplier provides a bad batch that was poorly stored or overheated, you could be feeding a toxin directly to your bees. Sucrose is a cleaner, more stable compound that bypasses this primary risk entirely. So, when we look at the science, the data strongly favors sucrose for individual bee health, colony strength, wax drawing, and gut biome stability. The use of high fructose corn syrup is driven almost entirely by the logistical challenges of scale and cost. It is a useful but riskier and inferior carbohydrate source. That is a fact. There is no debate about this. So you're probably asking yourself right now, why, with all the negative risk and performance issues that I just talked about, is high fructose corn syrup still the best option for my bee business? Well, let me explain. The decision to use high fructose corn syrup usually boils down to a few key reasons. High fructose corn syrup is delivered ready to feed by tanker truck and in large quantities. To mix the equivalent amount of a sucrose syrup for thousands of hives requires dedicated, full-time labor for days, including setting up and running mixing tanks and heating systems. The labor cost to make the sucrose feed can very quickly outweigh its benefits. High fructose corn syrup requires minimal mixing. This means it pumps easily through a syrup pump after water has been added to it. A cheap trash pump can usually mix the syrup perfectly fine without any human labor involved. This speeds up filling buckets or internal feeders dramatically, allowing for the beekeeper to feed thousands of colonies very quickly. While we discuss the HMF risk of high fructose corn syrup, sucrose syrup at commercial quantities is highly prone to fermentation and crystallization. High fructose corn syrup type 55, which is the most common type of corn syrup that beekeepers feed to their hives, has a higher solids content, which is naturally inhospitable to microbial growth, making it easier to store for short periods without fermentation. The bulk price per pound of high fructose corn syrup is also significantly cheaper than sucrose as well. At commercial volume, choosing sucrose is a financial decision that can translate into thousands of dollars in added operational cost. The research may show sucrose is better with small hive numbers, but those tests don't reflect the need to efficiently feed thousands of gallons of syrup in small windows of time. The alternative option, slowly mixing thousands of gallons of sucrose, can lead to lost revenue or weaker colonies due to delays in feeding. Here's just my personal opinion if you're trying to decide between sucrose and high fructose corn syrup for feeding your hives. If you're a hobbyist, your labor requirement is small, so stick with sucrose. It minimizes risk and maximizes the bee's health. If you're a sideliner, you're in the middle of the two choices. A hybrid strategy will probably work best for you. Use sucrose when time, labor, and finances permit, but consider high fructose corn syrup when those resources are tight. If you're commercial, high fructose corn syrup is usually going to be your best option. Commercial beekeepers need to focus on efficiency, but be aware of the downsides that come with high fructose corn syrup use and do your best to mitigate them. Here are some tips to help limit some of the downsides of high fructose corn syrup use. One of the biggest downsides of high fructose corn syrup is HMF. A few suggestions that will help control HMF levels are: store high fructose corn syrup in shaded, insulated tanks. HMF formation accelerates rapidly at elevated temperatures, usually around 120 degrees Fahrenheit or so. Also, don't heat the syrup with immersion or other types of heaters to help speed pump flow or mixing. Also, avoid long storage times. Rotate feedstock quickly and order only what you can use in a short, controlled window. If HMF is a concern, you can request that your syrup supplier provide a recent test that shows HMF levels, or you can send a sample in to an independent lab for yourself for an even greater peace of mind. Now, let's change directions and talk about customer concerns and perception for a minute. Every time that I make a video on my vlog about getting a load of high fructose corn syrup in, I almost always get a comment that I'm somehow using that syrup to boost my honey production through syrup adulteration. Honestly, those comments make me very angry when I get them. It happens often enough that I feel the need to address them. The concerns of non-beekeepers about honey adulteration are valid. They are unfortunately necessary in today's market. Let me be clear, honey fraud is a widespread problem. Some disreputable beekeepers do intentionally feed their hives syrup and then harvest that from the bees and sell it as pure honey. Personally, I think it's more of an international problem than a domestic one, but it does unfortunately happen here at home too. This practice severely undercuts every honest beekeeper. You, the consumer, have every right to be skeptical of the food you eat. But let me be straight with you. I'm passionate about beekeeping because I respect the quality of the product the bees create. I built my business on the promise of 100% authentic nectar-derived honey. Any practice that compromises that promise is completely unacceptable to me. I view food fraud not only as illegal, but also as a betrayal of trust. So why do you see me ordering thousands of gallons of high fructose corn syrup every year? Well, the reason is really simple. Bees need to eat. I have a lot of hives. They drink a lot of syrup. Syrup is used solely as a fuel to build colony strength, rear brood, and draw comb, never with the intent that it be stored in the honey supers. The goal is to keep the colony alive and healthy until the natural nectar flow begins. Harvesting feed syrup is both economically foolish and reputationally destructive. If tested, honey derived from C4 class sugars like corn syrup risk failing the stable carbon isotope ratio analysis test. This is the very test used by labs to detect food fraud. Failing that test would destroy mine or any brand's integrity. The syrup I feed my hives is consumed to meet the hive's massive internal demands, not stored as a harvestable crop. I want you to trust that statement, so I will explain how bees use the syrup that I and other beekeepers feed them. But first, let me answer another question that I often get. Can bees move honey or feed between boxes? The honest answer is yes, they can. Bees are incredible at managing their resources. If the brood nest moves, they'll unseal, consume, and relocate stores. This has been confirmed by labs like the USDA. That's why timing is everything. I ensure the colonies have plenty of time to metabolize the feed before any honey supers go on. By then, it's been burned off. So yeah, bees can move syrup stores into honey supers. But in a well-managed operation, they don't. That's a management issue that must be addressed by the beekeeper. A full 10 frame deep holds roughly 60 to 80 pounds of honey. During early spring buildup, a strong colony will typically consume about 0.7 of a pound to roughly 2 pounds of food per day under normal conditions. In 3 to 4 weeks of active spring buildup, that single deep can burn through roughly 20 to 60 pounds of food. The syrup I fed to get the hives through winter is being consumed to fuel the massive energy requirements of brood rearing. In my specific operation, I stop feeding the hives when they're shipped out to California in January or February. I don't put honey supers on until April, so the hives have had more than enough time to burn through any syrup that was fed to them months prior to the honey flow. Alright, so we've covered a lot of ground today, from bee biology to business management. Here are the 4 key takeaways I hope you remember. First, the science is clear. Sucrose is the superior carbohydrate for honeybees. It's what helps them build better fat reserves, draw more comb, and maintain healthier digestion. Second, the real threat with high fructose corn syrup is simple. It's the risk of HMF forming from heat or poor storage. That's a very well-known toxin, and why quality control is non-negotiable when using this type of syrup. Third, as a commercial operator, I rely on high fructose corn syrup for logistics and efficiency. It allows me to feed 2,000 hives quickly, keeping them alive and ready for production. And finally, when you see me feeding, remember, it's food for the bees, not adulteration to boost my profits. To back up every claim that I made here today, I'm providing the links to 14 peer-reviewed scientific studies in the show notes that I used to prepare this episode. These are the core papers on bee metabolism, HMF toxicity, and colony performance. And as always, thanks for listening. Thank you for tuning in to the Pollination Podcast. My name is Matthew Walker, owner of Walk in the Woods Apiary. I hope I have answered some of your beekeeping questions. Please leave your comments down below. If you would like to be a guest on the show, please reach out to me at thepollinationpodcast@gmail.com.